After losing everything in the city, Sarah Mitchell made a decision that would change her life forever. With her 2 children and their last savings, she bought Willow Creek Farm, a rundown property that nobody else wanted. Against all odds, Sarah turned the failing farm around. Her crops flourished, her debts shrank, and for the first time in years, hope bloomed alongside her wheat fields. But success breeds jealousy in small farming communities. Her neighbors watched as this city woman achieved what they said was impossible. They watched, they whispered, and they planned. In one night, they destroyed everything she had built. But what these jealous neighbors didn't count on was Sarah's determination, or the unexpected allies who would stand beside her. Will Sarah find the strength to rebuild? Or will her dream of a better life be crushed beneath the weight of small-town cruelty? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The foreclosure notice trembled in Sarah Mitchell's hands as she stood in her former office, cardboard box at her feet. 15 years of corporate success reduced to a single box and a piece of paper that declared her family homeless. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline seemed to mock her with its gleaming promise of prosperity. "Mom," Emma's text lit up her phone. "They're saying weird stuff at school about us moving." Sarah's heart clenched. Emma, 14, and already too wise to her mother's worried silences. And Tyler, just 11, still believing every reassurance she managed to summon. How could she tell them that their comfortable suburban life was about to change completely? She typed back, "Family meeting tonight. I love you." That evening, sitting around their kitchen island for what would be one of the last times, Sarah faced her children. Emma's arms were crossed, defensive. Tyler fidgeted with his tablet, but his eyes kept darting to her face. "We're going to have an adventure," Sarah began, the words tasting bitter with forced optimism. "The kind of adventure that means we're poor now?" Emma's voice cracked. Sarah took a deep breath. "The kind that means we're brave. Remember when Dad left and everyone said we couldn't make it on our own? We proved them wrong then. We'll prove them wrong now." Tyler set down his tablet. "Are we moving?" "Yes." Sarah pulled up the listing on her laptop. "I found a place. It's different." The pictures of Willow Creek Farm filled the screen. The peeling paint of the farmhouse, the sagging fence, the overgrown fields. It all looked as desperate as Sarah felt. But the price was right. More than right, it was their only option. "A farm?" Emma's voice rose. "We don't know anything about farming. We can learn." Sarah clicked through more photos. "Look at the space, the possibility. The house is solid underneath all that weathering. The soil tests came back excellent, and there's a good school in town." "Town?" Tyler leaned closer. "What town?" "Millbrook, about 3 hours from here." Sarah watched their faces carefully. "Small, but they have everything we need, including opportunities we couldn't afford here anymore." Emma stood abruptly. "This is insane. We can't just become farmers. What about my friends, my dance team? Everything is here." "Everything we're about to lose is here," Sarah corrected gently. "The bankruptcy, the foreclosure, it's all happening, Emma. We can either let it defeat us, or we can choose our next chapter." Tyler's small hand covered hers. "I always wanted to learn about growing stuff, like in science class." Sarah squeezed his hand, grateful for his simple acceptance. Emma paced the kitchen, her sock feet silent on the tiles they'd picked out together years ago. "How long do we have?" Emma finally asked. 2 weeks. The farm's owner is motivated to sell. He's willing to include basic equipment in the price, and there's a small greenhouse that just needs some repair." 2 weeks. Emma's voice cracked again. "That's all." Sarah stood, pulling both children into her arms. They didn't resist, and she felt their shared trembling. "I know it's fast, I know it's scary, but we're Mitchells. We don't break, we adapt." That night, after the kids were in bed, Sarah sat alone in the dark kitchen. Her laptop glowed with tabs full of farming tutorials, agricultural guides, and community college courses she could take online. The learning curve ahead was vertical, but she had no choice. The severance package from her firm would cover the farm's down payment and basic supplies. After that, they would have to make it work. She clicked back to the photo of Willow Creek Farm. Beyond the disrepair, she could see something else now. Possibility. The wide fields could grow anything with enough work and learning. The farmhouse could become a home with enough care and patience. And maybe, just maybe, this desperate choice could become their salvation. Sarah closed her laptop and walked to the window. Chicago's lights sparkled, beautiful and indifferent to her family's crisis. Soon those lights would be just a memory, replaced by stars over open fields. She touched the foreclosure notice, now folded neatly on the counter. "Watch us grow," she whispered to the night, a promise to herself and her children. Just watch us grow. The old farming manual felt fragile in Sarah's hands as she sat on the farmhouse's front porch, watching the sunrise paint their new world in shades of possibility. Her grandfather's handwritten notes filled the margins. Wisdom from a generation that knew the land's language by heart. She'd found the book in his attic years ago, never imagining it would become her lifeline. "Mom!" Tyler's voice carried from inside. "The shower's doing that thing again." Sarah marked her place with a faded receipt and headed inside. The farmhouse's ancient plumbing was just one of countless challenges they discovered in their first week at Willow Creek Farm. The list of repairs seemed to grow hourly, but at least the roof was solid and the walls were straight. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair wrapped in a towel. "I can't believe we're actually living like this, like pioneers." Sarah tried to inject enthusiasm into her voice as she fiddled with the water heater. "Think of it as an extended camping trip." "Pioneers had actual farmers teaching them stuff," Emma muttered. "Not YouTube tutorials." The water sputtered, then flowed clear and hot. Sarah counted it as the day's first victory. "Actually, I'm meeting someone today who might help with that. Mr. Peterson from the farm supply store mentioned an old-timer who used to work this land." Tyler bounded into the kitchen, already dressed in what he called his farmer clothes. Overalls they'd found at a thrift store. "Can I come? I want to learn everything." Sarah ruffled his hair. "School first. Farming second, both of you. The bus will be here in 20 minutes. As her children finished getting ready, Sarah returned to the porch and her grandfather's manual. The morning light revealed the vastness of their undertaking, 50 acres of possibility and potential disaster. The previous owner had left basic equipment, a tractor that had seen better days, some implements she was still learning to identify, and the greenhouse that now housed her first tentative seedlings. The school bus's arrival interrupted her studying. She watched her children climb aboard, Emma's reluctance visible in every step, while Tyler practically bounced. The other students' stares were obvious, even from a distance. News traveled fast. In small towns, and the city family trying to farm was apparently the biggest story Millbrook had seen in years. After the bus disappeared around the bend, Sarah changed into her own work clothes and headed to the greenhouse. Her grandfather's manual had emphasized starting small, focusing on crops that could succeed even with minimal experience. The seedlings were her first real test. Tomatoes, peppers, and herbs that might eventually supply local restaurants if she could keep them alive. "Well, look who thinks she's a farmer," the voice startled her. A man stood at the greenhouse entrance, middle-aged and weather-worn, looking at her seedlings with open skepticism. "Mr. Carter," Sarah straightened, "from next door." "Jim Carter." He stepped inside, uninvited. "Third generation on my land. Fourth, if my boy decides to stay in the business." His eyes swept the greenhouse. "Those tomatoes are too wet. You'll get root rot." Sarah glanced at her carefully tended plants. The soil moisture meter said, "Meters." He snorted. "My daddy used his fingers, same as his daddy before him. Stick your finger in that soil. Go on." Suppressing her irritation, Sarah did as instructed. The soil was indeed wetter than she'd realized. Technology's fine, Carter continued, but it ain't farming. Farming's in the blood, in the bones. You can't learn it from books and YouTube. Maybe not. Sarah met his gaze steadily. But I can learn it. My children need me to learn it. Your children need you to be realistic. Sell now, while you can still get out without losing everything. This ain't a game for city folks playing farmer. He left before she could respond, screen door banging. Behind him, Sarah turned back to her seedlings, hands trembling slightly as she adjusted their water levels. That afternoon, she met Gerald Thompson, the former farmhand Mr. Peterson had mentioned. In his 80s now, Gerald's hands were gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes sparkled with energy as he walked the property with her. "Land's good," he said, crumbling soil between his fingers. "Been sleeping a while, but it remembers what to do. Just need someone to wake it up proper." "I don't know how," Sarah admitted. "I'm trying to learn, but folks like Jim Carter are making sure you know you're not welcome." Gerald nodded. "Been that way since his daddy's time. Always. Thinking they know the only right way to work the land." He patted her shoulder. "Tell you what, you keep reading those books and watching those videos, but twice a week you let this old man share what 50 years of farming taught him. Deal?" Sarah felt tears threatening. "Deal, but I can't pay much. Pay me in vegetables when they come in," he winked, "and maybe help an old man feel useful again." That evening, Sarah added notes to her grandfather's manual while her children did homework at the kitchen table. Tyler was drawing what looked like elaborate farm machinery in the margins of his math worksheet. Emma's biology textbook was open to a chapter on plant growth. "Mr. Thompson's going to teach me about the soil tomorrow," Sarah mentioned casually. "If anyone's interested in learning too. After homework, of course." Emma didn't look up, but her pencil stopped moving. Tyler bounced in his chair. "Can we plant corn? Like lots of corn? Like Field of Dreams? Maybe next season," Sarah smiled. "For now, we start small. Learn the basics. Like pioneers," Emma said quietly, surprising them both. "But with YouTube and an old farmer instead of just hoping we don't starve." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. Outside, the sun was setting on their first week at Willow Creek Farm. They had survived it. Tomorrow they would learn more, work harder, prove the Jim Carters of the world wrong. They would grow, all of them. Sarah pressed the first successful seedling between the pages of her journal, careful not to damage the delicate leaves. After 6 weeks of dawn-to-dusk work, this tiny plant represented their first real victory at Willow Creek Farm. Gerald had guided her through the soil preparation, but the growing, that had been all them. "Look what Tyler's doing now," Emma called from the kitchen window. "He's naming them." Outside, Tyler moved between the rows of emerging plants, placing small wooden markers. Sarah could see him talking to each seedling as he worked. Last week, he'd asked to move his bedroom to the east side of the house, "so I can see the plants first thing." The changes in her children were as surprising as the green shoots pushing through dark soil. Tyler had discovered a passion for agriculture that went beyond simple enthusiasm. His science teacher had called last week, excited about his sudden intense interest in biology and earth sciences. And Emma. The transformation was subtler, but no less remarkable. Sarah often found her daughter's homework mixed with printouts about organic farming and sustainable agriculture. She hadn't stopped missing Chicago, but she'd started looking forward too. Mrs. Mitchell, Sarah turned to find Lisa Cooper, the grocery store owner's wife, standing on their porch. She held a basket of preserves and fresh bread. "I noticed. Your kitchen's been busy with all the settling in," Lisa smiled. "Thought you might enjoy some home-canned vegetables from my garden." The gesture brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. After weeks of suspicious looks and whispered comments, simple kindness felt revolutionary. "Would you like to come in? We just made coffee." Lisa's visit marked a subtle shift in the community's response to them. Not with everyone, she could Feel Jim Carter watching from his property whenever she worked the fields, his disapproval radiating across the property line. But others began to thaw. The real change came 3 days later. Sarah was struggling with the temperamental tractor when a truck pulled into the drive. Mark Peterson, from the farm supply store, stepped out with his teenage son. "Heard you were having equipment troubles," he said. "Tommy here's good with engines. Thought we might take a look." Tommy, who couldn't be more than 16, approached the tractor with quiet confidence. "Yeah, these old internationals can be tricky. Mind if I—" Within an hour, the tractor was running better than it had since they'd arrived. When Sarah reached for her wallet, Mark waved her off. "Consider it an investment in the community," he said. "Besides, Tommy needs practice if he's going to take over the store someday." That evening, Sarah updated her business plan. Gerald had suggested focusing on specialty crops that the bigger farms ignored: heirloom vegetables, herbs, flowers for the local florist. "Find the gaps," he'd advised. "Fill the needs nobody else is meeting." Emma looked up from her phone as Sarah worked. "Kelsey invited me to study group tomorrow. Her mom can drive me home." Sarah recognized the name. One of the farming families, though not as openly hostile as the Carters. "That's wonderful, honey. They have horses," Emma added casually. She said maybe she could teach me to ride sometime. If that's okay." The hope in her daughter's voice made Sarah's heart ache. "Of course it's okay." Later that night, Sarah walked the property under a nearly full moon. The seedlings cast tiny shadows, their success giving her confidence to plan the next phase. With Mark Peterson's support, she might be able to secure the additional equipment they'd need for expansion. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Someone at the property line. Jim Carter stood watching, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Sarah raised her hand in greeting, but he turned away, disappearing into the shadows of his own fields. The next morning, she found boot prints through one of the newly planted rows. Nothing was permanently damaged, but the message was clear. Success was drawing attention, not all of it welcome. "You need cameras," Gerald said when she showed him the tracks. "And you need to document everything. Small minds don't like seeing others succeed." "I thought farming was about community," Sarah said, "about helping each other." "It used to be. Still is for some. But folks like Jim, they've forgotten that none of us succeeds alone." Tyler ran up, clutching one of his plant markers. "Mom, Mom, the sunflowers are sprouting. Come see." His excitement was contagious. Sarah followed him to the small plot they designated as his garden, where tiny green shoots were indeed breaking through. She touched one gently, marveling at its determination to grow despite all odds, like mother, like seedling. The town hall's meeting minutes lay open on Sarah's kitchen table, coffee rings staining the edges. She'd read them so many times she could recite them from memory. Millbrook Agricultural Association membership requires 3 generations of farming experience or sponsorship from 2 existing members. The bylaws hadn't been updated since 1963, and they might as well have been carved in stone. "But that's not fair," Tyler protested, reading over her shoulder. "We're farmers now too." Sarah smoothed his hair. "Sometimes, honey, being something and being accepted as something are 2 different things." The association meeting was scheduled for that evening. Gerald had encouraged her to attend, even though her membership application had already been rejected. "Show them you won't be ignored," he'd said. "Make them see you." The community center buzzed with conversation when Sarah arrived, but voices hushed as she took a seat in the back. Jim Carter sat at the front table with other board members, his expression stormy. His son Blake lounged against the wall, smirking at her presence. "First order of business," Howard Green, the association president, called the meeting to order. "Membership applications." 3 new applications were quickly approved, all from farming families' children reaching legal age. Then Howard cleared his throat. "We also received an application from Sarah Mitchell of Willow Creek Farm, which was rejected due to lack of qualifications or sponsorship." Sarah stood. I'd like to appeal that decision. There's no appeal process. Jim Carter cut in. The bylaws are clear. The bylaws are outdated, Sarah countered. They're keeping out new blood, new ideas, new possibilities for our community. New ideas? Blake Carter pushed off the wall. Like those organic seedlings you're selling at the farmer's market. Undercutting established prices. I'm offering different products. Sarah kept her voice steady. Heirloom varieties, specialty herbs. You're playing at farming, Jim interrupted. This association protects real farmers who've worked this land for generations. Mark Peterson stood up. I'll sponsor her application. The room erupted in murmurs. Jim Carter's face darkened. You can't, he said. You're not a farmer, Mark. You're a supplier. My family's been farming here since before yours arrived, Jim. Mark's voice was quiet but firm. I lease my land to others now, but I'm still a member, and I say Sarah Mitchell deserves a chance. She needs 2 sponsors, Howard reminded them. And Jim's right. We have standards. I'll be her second sponsor. The new voice belonged to Eleanor Watson, 83 years old, and owner of the largest fruit orchards in the county. She hadn't attended a meeting in years, but here she was, leaning on her cane in the doorway. Eleanor, Jim started, but she cut him off with a wave. I've watched that girl work, Eleanor said. Watched her learn, watched her children pitch. She's doing more with Willow Creek than anyone has in 20 years. And she's doing it right, not just throwing chemicals at problems like some people I could name. The implied criticism made Jim's face redden. This is ridiculous. She's not qualified. I move to update the bylaws, Mark Peterson interrupted, to reflect the current reality of farming. We need new people, new ideas, or we'll die out like so many other farming communities. I second the motion. Eleanor thumped her cane for emphasis. Howard looked uncomfortable. We'd need a committee to study any changes, and in the meantime, Eleanor said, you have 2 valid sponsorships for Sarah's application. Call the vote. Sarah held her breath as Howard conducted the vote. It was close, too close, but in the end her application was approved by a margin of 2 votes. Jim Carter and his supporters stormed out, but others came to welcome her, including several younger farmers interested in her organic methods. Don't think this changes anything, Blake Carter warned as he followed his father out. You're still not one of us. No, Sarah agreed. I'm just someone trying to feed her family and work her land, like everyone else here. Later that night, Sarah added the meeting minutes to her growing file of farm documents. Eleanor had lingered, after the meeting, sharing stories of her own early days of farming. They fought me too, she'd said, when I took over after my husband died. Said a woman couldn't run an orchard. Now I'm the biggest supplier of apples in 3 counties. She'd squeezed Sarah's hand. Don't let them scare you off. Fear of change is just fear of losing control. The moon cast long shadows across her fields as Sarah checked the seedlings one last time before bed. Membership in the association meant access to resources, bulk purchasing power, shared equipment, but more than that, it meant she'd stood her ground. Fought back. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she'd won a small victory, and small victories, like seedlings, could grow into something bigger with proper care. The local newspaper spread across Sarah's desk. Her greenhouse featured prominently on the front page. New methods yield big results at Willow Creek Farm, the headline declared. The article detailed her combination of traditional farming wisdom and modern organic techniques, complete with quotes from Gerald about the revival of sustainable agriculture in Millbrook. Your phone's been ringing all morning, Emma said, bringing in a fresh cup of coffee. 3 more restaurants want to talk about buying your herbs. Sarah smiled at her daughter's use of your. 2 months ago it had been this stupid farm. Now Emma was helping manage their growing restaurant accounts, her organizational skills proving invaluable as the business expanded. Did you see what Tyler's doing in the greenhouse? Emma continued. He's got this whole experiment going with different growing mediums. His science teacher's helping him turn it into a project for the state fair. the transformation in her. Children continued to amaze her. Tyler had become the youngest member of the county's 4-H club, his natural curiosity about growing things earning him mentorship from several experienced farmers. Even Jim Carter's wife had been overheard praising the boy's dedication at the grocery store. A truck pulled into the driveway, another delivery of supplies from Peterson's store. But instead of Tommy, it was Blake Carter who stepped out. "Dad sent me to tell you to take down that article," he said without preamble. "You're making us look bad." Sarah set down her coffee. "How exactly am I doing that? All that talk about innovative organic methods and sustainable practices. People are asking why we don't do the same, starting to question our ways." "That's not my problem, Blake. I'm just farming my land the way I think is right." "Yeah? Well, your way's causing trouble. Some of our biggest buyers are asking about organic options now. Dad says—" "I don't actually care what your dad says," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. "The article stays up. The methods stay in place. And if your buyers are asking questions, maybe you should be asking yourselves some too." Blake's face reddened. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Coming here with your city ideas, your internet research. You don't know anything about real farming. I know that my city ideas are working. I know that my crops are thriving without drowning them in chemicals. And I know that change is coming to Millbrook, whether your father likes it or not." After Blake stormed off, Sarah walked through her greenhouse. The herbs filled the air with a symphony of scents: basil, thyme, rosemary, lavender. Restaurants in 3 counties now bought her organic herbs and heirloom vegetables. The farmer's market stall she shared with Eleanor Watson sold out every weekend. Tyler's experiment occupied one corner. Neat rows of seedlings in different soil mixtures, each meticulously labeled and documented. His latest science test, marked with an A+, was pinned to the wall above them. "The Effects of Organic Growing Medium on Plant Health," the title read in his careful handwriting. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Mark Peterson, Jim Carter's. "At the store raising hell about the article. Says you're disrupting the natural order. Told him the natural order is always changing. Might need to watch your back, though." She wasn't surprised. Success bred resentment, Gerald had warned her. The better she did, the more threatened some would feel. But she hadn't expected the level of hostility that seemed to be building. That evening, as she updated their financial projections, Sarah heard Emma on the phone in the next room. "No, I can't come to your party," her daughter was saying, "because your brother's a jerk who's trying to hurt my mom's business. Yes, I know he's your brother. No, that doesn't make it okay." Sarah's heart ached. The growing tension was affecting more than just business. It was shaping her children's social lives, forcing them to take sides in a conflict they shouldn't have to navigate. But the numbers on her spreadsheet told a clear story. Their methods were working. The farm was not just surviving, but beginning to thrive. The small organic grocery in the next county had just offered them a regular contract. 2 more restaurants had called about specialty produce. They were succeeding, and that, she was learning, was sometimes the most dangerous thing of all. The anonymous letter lay on Sarah's desk like a coiled snake. No return address, no signature, just a clear message typed in stark black letters. "Stop stealing our customers or face the consequences. Some accidents can't be prevented on a farm." She'd found it in their mailbox that morning, tucked between utility bills and seed catalogues. It wasn't the first sign of escalating hostility. Small things had been happening all week. A tire mysteriously flattened on the delivery truck, orders mysteriously cancelled, whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the farm supply store. "Mom?" Tyler stood in the doorway, his face unusually serious. "Something's wrong with the greenhouse temperature controls." Sarah followed him to the greenhouse, where the digital thermometer showed 95 degrees, despite the moderate spring weather. The ventilation system had been tampered with, the controls clearly damaged by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Don't touch anything else," Sarah said, pulling out her phone to take pictures. "This is vandalism." Like the truck? Tyler asked quietly. And the cancelled orders? She looked at her son, surprised by his awareness. You've noticed? Emma says the Carter boy and his friends are behind it. She heard them bragging at school. Sarah's hand tightened on her phone. Did she tell you that? Or did you overhear? She told me, said I should be careful walking home from the bus stop. Tyler scuffed his foot against the greenhouse floor. She's been walking me home, but she didn't want you to worry. Something cold settled in Sarah's stomach. Her children were protecting her when it should be the other way around. The sheriff arrived 30 minutes later, but his investigation felt perfunctory at best. No proof who did it, he said, barely glancing at the damaged controls. Could have been kids playing pranks, or animal damage. Animals typed this letter. Sarah held up the threat, but the sheriff just shrugged. Anyone could have sent that. Best thing is to just keep your head down, don't make waves. After he left, Sarah called Gerald. The old farmer arrived quickly, his face darkening as he examined the damage. They're getting bolder, he said. First the small things, now this. They're testing to see what they can get away with. The sheriff won't help. Course not. His brother-in-law works for Carter Farms. Gerald straightened up with a grunt. You need cameras, good ones with night vision, and you need to document everything. Emma came home from school while they were installing the security system, her face tight with anger. Blake Carter was running his mouth again today, saying you're going to learn your place one way or another. Did he threaten you directly? Sarah asked sharply. No, he's not that stupid, but his friends are making sure everyone knows we're not welcome here. Emma dropped her backpack on the kitchen table. Kelsey's not allowed to hang out with me anymore. Her parents said it's too complicated right now. Sarah pulled her daughter into a hug, feeling her resist for a moment before melting into it. I'm so sorry, honey. Don't be sorry, Emma said fiercely. Be angry. They're trying to run us out because they're scared of looking bad in comparison. It's pathetic. That evening, Sarah met with Mark Peterson and Eleanor Watson at the diner, outside town. She showed them the letter and the pictures of the damage. They're escalating faster than I expected, Eleanor said, her usual good humor replaced by concern. Jim Carter's always been a bully, but this is different. He's scared. Of what? Sarah asked. We're hardly a threat to his operation. You're a threat to his way of thinking, Mark explained. Your success challenges everything he's been saying for years about how farming has to be done, and others are starting to listen. The organic grocery contract was the last straw, Eleanor added. That used to be Carter's account, until they started asking questions about his pesticide use. Sarah ran her fingers over the threatening letter. So what do I do? Document everything, Mark said. Get it all on camera and don't back down. The minute you show weakness, they'll move in for the kill. And watch your children, Eleanor added softly. Jim Carter's a lot of things, but I never thought he'd stoop to threatening children. His son, though, Blake's got something to prove. Later that night, Sarah walked her property with a flashlight, checking the newly installed cameras. The fields stretched out before her, her crops reaching toward the stars. Everything they'd built, everything they'd worked for, was at risk. But looking back at the farmhouse, seeing the lights on in her children's rooms, she felt her resolve harden. They wouldn't be driven out. They wouldn't be intimidated. Some things were worth fighting for. And Willow Creek Farm had become more than just land. It was their home, their future, their stand against those who thought they could bully others into submission. Let them try their worst. The Mitchells weren't going anywhere. The community bulletin board outside Peterson's store displayed Sarah's newest flyer, Willow Creek Farm, fresh organic produce, heirloom varieties, farm to table. Below it, someone had scrawled, City Slicker Go Home, in red marker. But surrounding her flyer were notes of support, orders for vegetables, requests for gardening tips, even a thank you note from the local cafe praising her herbs. Just ignore that, Mark said, wiping away the graffiti. For every person trying to run you off, there are 3 more stepping up to help. He was right. The morning's farmers' market proved it. Sarah's stand now expanded to include Tyler's. Experimental microgreens and Emma's homemade herb vinegars had a line forming before they finished setting up. "Is it true you're teaching organic farming classes?" a young woman asked, cradling a basket of heirloom tomatoes. "My husband and I just bought land, but we don't want to use traditional methods." "Word travels fast," Sarah smiled. "We're starting a workshop series next month. Gerald Thompson's helping me run it." More customers gathered, asking questions about sustainable practices, soil health, natural pest control. Sarah noticed several of Carter's usual buyers in the crowd, clearly interested despite the ongoing tension. Emma managed the cash box with professional efficiency, while Tyler enthusiastically explained his growing techniques to anyone who would listen. Looking at her children now, Sarah barely recognized the reluctant city kids who'd arrived just months ago. "Mitchell!" The sharp voice cut through the market's pleasant buzz. Blake Carter pushed through the crowd, his father close behind. "This ends now," Jim Carter declared, holding up one of Sarah's flyers. "You're advertising farming classes. You've been here 5 minutes and you think you can teach." "Actually," Gerald spoke up from nearby, "she's teaching with me. Got a problem with my 50 years of experience, Jim." Carter faltered slightly. "Gerald, you're encouraging this nonsense. These organic methods, these fancy vegetables, it's not real farming." "Tell that to our customers," Emma said quietly, but loud enough to be heard. "Tell that to the restaurants buying our produce. Tell that to the people asking about our methods." A crowd was gathering. Sarah saw Mark Peterson. Moving closer, saw Eleanor Watson watching from her orchard stand. "You're undermining everything we've built here," Blake spat. "All our traditions, all your control," Sarah interrupted. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Control over how things are done, who gets to participate, who gets to succeed. You don't understand anything about—" "I understand plenty," Sarah cut him off again. "I understand that you're scared. Scared of change, scared of new ideas, scared of losing your grip on this community. But this isn't just your community anymore." Murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd. Sarah saw several older farmers nodding, saw younger faces lighting up with hope. "We're not going anywhere," Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the market. "And we're not going to be intimidated by vandalism or threats or bullying. This land doesn't care who our grandparents were or what methods we use. It only cares how we treat it." Jim Carter's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You think a few months of playing farmer makes you an expert? You think some damaged equipment and cancelled orders are intimidating? You haven't seen anything yet." The threat hung in the air, but it didn't land quite as Carter intended. Instead, phones came out recording his words. People moved closer to Sarah's stand, forming an unconscious barrier between her family and the Carters. "Is that a threat, Jim?" Eleanor Watson's voice cut through the tension, "Because it sure sounded like one, and there are an awful lot of witnesses here." Blake grabbed his father's arm. "Dad, come on, not here." They retreated, but Sarah knew this wasn't over. If anything, their public confrontation would make the Carters more dangerous. Yet looking around at the supportive faces, the customers still lined up at her stand, the children proudly continuing their work, Sarah felt something shift. The battle lines were clearer now, but so were the allies standing with them. "Well," Gerald chuckled, "if you wanted to advertise those farming classes, I'd say you just did. Nothing draws a crowd like seeing someone stand up to a bully." He was right. By day's end, the workshop sign-up sheet was full, with a waiting list started for the next session. More importantly, people were talking about change, about progress, about the future of farming in Millbrook. "Mom," Tyler said as they packed up, "I think we just started a revolution." Emma rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "More like we just painted a bigger target on our backs." "Maybe," Sarah agreed, watching the sun set over their corner of the market. "But we're not facing it alone anymore." The community bulletin board had been cleaned of graffiti. In its place were more notes, more orders, more signs of support. Small victories, perhaps, but they were adding up, like their crops. Change was growing in Millbrook, and no amount of threatening weather could stop it now. The weather report glowed on Sarah's laptop screen. Clear skies predicted for the next 2 weeks, perfect conditions for their first major harvest. Her crops stretched across the fields in neat rows, heavy with promise. Everything was going right, which was exactly what worried her. "Another camera went dark last night," Emma reported, checking the security feeds on her tablet. "That's the third one this week. Someone's definitely messing with them." Sarah made a note in her growing documentation file. The incidents were escalating. Cameras disabled, strange cars driving slowly past the farm at night, suspicious movement in the fields after dark. The police continued to dismiss her concerns, but Sarah's instincts told her something was building. "Tyler's bus is late," Emma said suddenly, checking her phone. "He always texts when he's on his way home." Sarah tried her son's phone. No answer. Her heart rate picked up as she dialed the school. "Oh, Tyler Mitchell," the secretary said. "He left early. Blake Carter's mother picked him up. Said she had your permission." The world tilted sideways. Sarah ended the call, already grabbing her keys. "Call Gerald and Mark. Tell them Tyler's missing and the Carters are involved." Emma's face went pale. "Mom, stay here. Lock the doors. Keep calling Tyler's phone." Sarah's truck kicked up dust as she sped toward the Carter property. She'd barely put it in park before jumping out, running toward the main house. Jim Carter met her on the porch. "Where is he?" Sarah demanded. "Where's who?" Carter's attempt at innocence was betrayed by the slight smirk playing at his lips. "My 11-year-old son, who your wife illegally took from school. Where is he?" Now. Carter held up his hands. "My wife was just being neighborly. The boy wanted to see our operation, learn some real farming." "Mrs. Mitchell?" Tyler's voice came from around the barn. He appeared with Mrs. Carter, looking confused but unharmed. "Mom, what's wrong? Mrs. Carter was showing me their hybrid corn project. Did you know they're experimenting with—" Sarah pulled Tyler into a fierce hug, her heart hammering. "Never again," she said over his head to Mrs. Carter. "You never take my child without my permission. I'll have your teaching license for this." Mrs. Carter's face fell. "Jim said, he said you'd agreed to it, that you wanted Tyler to learn." "Of course that's what I said," Carter snapped at his wife. "Had to show the boy some proper farming, since his mother's filling his head with all that organic nonsense." "You used your wife to kidnap my son?" Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. "Used her teaching position to access him?" "Kidnap," Carter scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. We were educating him." "Mom?" Tyler's voice was small. "I'm sorry. They said you knew. Not your fault, honey." Sarah kept one arm around him as she pulled out her phone. "But Mr. Carter needs to learn that using children to make a point is going to have consequences." Carter's smirk vanished. "Now, hold on." "Sarah!" Mark Peterson's truck skidded into the drive, Gerald right behind him. Both men looked ready for war. "Tyler's safe," Sarah called to them, "but we're about to have a conversation with the school board about Mrs. Carter's judgment, and then with the sheriff about Mr. Carter's methods." "You're overreacting," Carter started, but his wife cut him off. "Jim, you said Sarah had approved this. You made me think—" Mrs. Carter's voice cracked. "I could lose my job. They could press charges." "That's exactly what I'm going to do," Sarah confirmed, dialing the police. Unless what?" Carter demanded. "Unless the harassment stops, all of it. The cameras, the drive-bys, the threats. It ends now, or I destroy you, not through farming, but through your own actions." The statement hung in the autumn air. Carter's face worked through several emotions before settling into a scowl. "You think you can threaten me?" "No threats," Sarah said calmly. "Just consequences. Choose carefully, Jim. Your wife's career, your reputation, your standing in this community, all of that can disappear with one phone call. Or we can all agree that this vendetta of yours is finished." Gerald stepped forward. "Choose wisely, Jim. The world's changing. Don't destroy your family trying to hold on to the past." Mrs. Carter touched her husband's arm. "Jim, please, I can't believe you used me to... Just stop this, please." Something shifted in Carter's expression, not surrender exactly, but recognition. He gave a sharp nod. "Fine, we'll back off. But this isn't over, Mitchell. The harvest will tell the real story." "Yes," Sarah agreed, leading Tyler to her truck. "It will." Later that night, after Tyler had gone to bed, with Emma insisting on sleeping in his room just in case, Sarah sat with Gerald and Mark on the porch. The security cameras blinked steadily, monitoring empty fields. "He'll honor it," Gerald said. "Jim Carter's many things, but he won't risk his wife's career." "You found his weakness. I hate that Tyler was put at risk," Sarah said. "That Mrs. Carter was used like that." "Sometimes winning means finding leverage," Mark observed. "You beat him at his own game." Sarah watched the moon rise over her ripening fields. The harvest was coming, and with it would come proof of her methods, her dedication, her right to be here. But for now, her son was safe, her crops were thriving, and she'd faced down the biggest bully in Millbrook. It felt like victory, even if the war wasn't quite over. The night wind carried the promise of autumn, of harvest, of change. Sarah breathed it in, letting it wash away the day's fear and replace it with determination. The real test was still to come. The security camera footage would later show everything in grainy black and white. 3 trucks arriving at 2:17 a.m., their headlights dark. 6 figures moving with purpose across the fields. The systematic destruction of Sarah Mitchell's dream, captured in silent, damning detail. But Sarah didn't need footage to tell her what happened. The devastation was written across her land in the harsh light of dawn. "Mom," Emma's voice cracked as they stood at the edge of the ruined fields. How did they do so much damage in one night? They had been thorough. Chemical herbicides had been sprayed across the organic crops, destroying months of careful cultivation. Heavy vehicles had crushed through the rows of vegetables, turning thriving plants into mulch. The greenhouse's irrigation system had been sabotaged, flooding some sections while leaving others bone dry. Tyler knelt in the mud, picking up a crushed tomato plant, one of his experimental varieties. They killed everything. Not quite. Everything, Sarah thought, but enough. Enough to destroy their contracts, their reputation, their chance at a successful first harvest. The calculated nature of the attack made it worse. This wasn't mindless vandalism. This was methodical destruction, aimed at their most vulnerable points. "Don't touch anything else," Gerald called, hurrying up the drive with Mark Peterson and the sheriff close behind. "This is a crime scene." The sheriff looked less dismissive than usual as he surveyed the damage. "This is extensive. This is premeditated," Mark said, his voice hard. "Look at the pattern. They knew exactly where to hit, what chemicals to use. This was planned." Sarah nodded toward the security cameras. "We have footage, which we'll review," the sheriff promised. But Sarah saw the doubt in his eyes. The figures would be masked, the trucks unmarked. Proof would be hard to establish. Eleanor Watson arrived as they walked the property, documenting the destruction. The older woman's face grew stonier with each ruined field they passed. "The chemical analysis will prove it," she said, taking samples of the withered plants. "They used restricted herbicides, the kind only licensed farmers can access. Even if we prove that, it doesn't prove who did it," the sheriff pointed out. "No," Eleanor agreed, "but it proves it wasn't random vandals. It proves it was farmers targeting farmers." Tyler had been following silently, but now he spoke up. "Look at this." He pointed to thick tire tracks cutting through the mud. "Those are from a John Deere 7R series tractor. Blake showed me theirs last week. Said it was the only one in the county." The adults stared at him. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Son, are you sure about that?" "I study tractors," Tyler said simply. "I know what I'm looking at." Sarah watched realization dawn on the sheriff's face. Evidence was evidence, even if it came from an 11-year-old boy. Mark pulled Sarah aside while the others continued, documenting the damage. This is going to hit the papers. Word's already spreading. How do you want to handle it? Sarah looked at her children. Emma taking photographs with fierce determination, Tyler pointing out evidence to the sheriff. They were angry, but they weren't beaten. They weren't even crying. We handle it publicly, she decided. No hiding, no shame. They wanted to destroy us. Let's show everyone exactly what they did. By noon, the story was everywhere. Local news crews arrived, capturing footage of the destruction. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with messages of support, offers of help, expressions of outrage. But it was the quiet moments that broke her. Tyler carefully collecting seeds from the ruined plants, determined to preserve something. Emma setting up a social media campaign to document the attack and recovery. Their resilience made her own. Tears feel like weakness. You're allowed to break down, Gerald told her softly as they watched the police finish their investigation. No one would blame you. Sarah touched a withered stalk that yesterday had been vibrant with life. Breaking down won't save my farm. No, he agreed, but sometimes you need to bend before you can stand stronger. That evening, after the police and reporters had gone, after the children had finally fallen, into exhausted sleep, Sarah walked her ruined fields alone. The moon illuminated the devastation in stark relief, shadows and destruction stretching toward the horizon. She had known farming would be hard, had expected challenges, setbacks, failures, but this calculated malice, this deliberate destruction of not just crops but dreams, this was different. Her phone buzzed, another message of support. This, one from the organic grocery they supplied. Whatever you need to rebuild, we're with you. Your ethics and methods are exactly what this community needs. Sarah looked back at the farmhouse where her children slept, at the greenhouse where Tyler's experiments lay ruined, at the fields that had promised so much just yesterday. Watch us grow, she whispered to the night, the same words she'd spoken when they'd first arrived. But this time, they weren't just words of hope. They were a declaration of war. The insurance denial letter arrived 3 days after the attack, its corporate letterhead and formal language adding insult to injury. Claim denied due to inadequate security measures and pre-existing community disputes. Sarah recognized Jim Carter's influence. His cousin sat on the insurance company's local review board. They can't do that, Emma protested, reading over her shoulder. We had cameras, we had documentation. They can, and they did. Sarah set the letter aside, adding it to her growing file of evidence. The police investigation was moving at a glacial pace, the sheriff finding excuses to delay interviews with the Carter family, despite Tyler's identification of their distinctive tractor tracks. The kitchen table had become their war room, covered with papers, photographs, and lists. Emma's social media campaign had gone viral, drawing attention from environmental groups and sustainable farming advocates across the state. Tyler's detailed documentation of the destroyed experiments had caught the interest of the university's agricultural department. But attention wouldn't pay their bills. Sarah's laptop displayed their harsh reality: contracts cancelled, orders withdrawn, savings dwindling. The organic grocery had stayed loyal, but they couldn't buy produce that no longer existed. Mrs. Mitchell? Sarah looked up to find Lisa Cooper, the grocery store owner's wife, standing in the doorway with several other women from town. "We've been talking," Lisa said, stepping inside. "What happened to your farm? It's not right. And the way the insurance company's handling it, that's worse." The women filed in, filling Sarah's kitchen with determined energy. Sarah recognized faces from her farming workshops, from the farmers' market, from PTA meetings. "My husband's on the bank board," one woman said. "He says Jim Carter's been pushing to call in your loan, claiming you can't recover from this." "He's wrong," Emma said fiercely. "We can recover. We will." "Of course you will," Lisa agreed, "because we're going to help." They laid out their plan, a fundraising campaign, not just online but throughout the community. Church suppers, bake sales, a benefit concert at the high school. Small actions that could add up to significant support. People are angry, Lisa explained, not just about the attack, but about what it represents. The old guard trying to crush new ideas, using violence and corruption to maintain control. Sarah felt tears threatening. I appreciate the thought, but the damage, it's extensive. We're looking at tens of thousands of dollars, and that's just for immediate recovery. We know, another woman nodded. That's why we're not just planning fundraisers, we're planning a revolution. The word hung in the air, reminiscent of Tyler's comment at the farmers' market, but this time it carried weight, backed by the determined faces of women who understood exactly what they were proposing. Martha's husband works for the State Environmental Protection Office, Lisa continued. He's very interested in testing those chemical samples Eleanor collected. Jane's daughter is an investigative reporter in the city, and my sister-in-law serves on the insurance commission. They weren't just offering charity, Sarah realized. They were offering ammunition. A truck pulled up outside. Gerald and Mark, returning from another meeting with the police. Their faces showed the same frustration Sarah had grown used to seeing. Sheriff's still stalling, Mark reported, then stopped short at the sight of the packed kitchen. Good, Lisa said. That gives us time to build our case properly. The men listened as the women outlined their strategy. Sarah watched Gerald's face transform from weariness to growing hope. You ladies understand what you're taking on? He asked finally. The Carters have been running things here for generations. They've got deep roots, powerful friends. So do we, Lisa replied. They just didn't realize it because they never saw us as threats. Women who lunch, women who organize bake sales. We're invisible to men like Jim Carter. That's about to become his biggest mistake. Later, after the impromptu war council had dispersed, Sarah stood in her ruined fields. The destroyed crops were already decaying, returning to the soil that had nurtured them. But unlike yesterday, she didn't see only destruction. Mom? Tyler joined her, carrying his notebook of experiments. The university professor called back. She says my documentation might be important for their study on chemical resistance in organic crops. Sarah pulled him close. You didn't just document destruction, did you? You documented evidence. That's what scientists do, he shrugged. Even when things go wrong, you can learn from it. Emma called from the house. More messages of support, more offers of help, more pieces of their recovery falling into place. The insurance denial letter still sat on the kitchen table, but it no longer felt like a death sentence. It felt like one more piece of evidence, one more link in the chain they would use to pull down the old guard's tower of control. They had lost their harvest, but they had gained an army. And this army didn't need tractors or chemicals to wage its war. It just needed truth, determination, and the kind of patience that women had learned through generations of fighting quiet battles. Sarah looked at the setting sun, remembering another sunset when she'd first arrived at Willow Creek Farm. She'd been full of desperate hope then, running from failure toward an uncertain future. Now she stood in the ruins of that hope, but she wasn't running anymore. She was planting new seeds, seeds of change that no amount of chemicals could kill. The GoFundMe page had started small, a simple campaign created by Sarah's teaching colleague at the local school. But within days, it had taken on a life of its own. The story of Willow Creek Farm's destruction and the community's response had struck a chord far beyond Millbrook's borders. Mom! Emma burst into the kitchen, laptop in hand. We just got a huge donation from an organic farming coalition in California. They want to feature our story in their newsletter. Sarah leaned over to look at the screen, her coffee forgotten. The donation was substantial, but it was the message attached that caught her attention. Your fight is our fight. Sustainable. Farming isn't just about methods, it's about changing the whole system. Keep standing strong. Outside, a convoy of trucks was pulling into the farm's drive. Local farmers, many of whom had attended Sarah's workshops, had organized a volunteer day to help clear the destroyed crops and prepare the soil for replanting. The soil tests came back, Gerald announced, waving a paper as he entered through the screen door. The chemical damage isn't as deep as we feared. With the right treatment, we can have the fields ready for winter cover crops. Tyler looked up from his own laptop, where he'd been corresponding with the university researcher. Dr. Rodriguez says we can use our fields as a case study for organic soil recovery. She's sending a team next week. The kitchen had become command central for their recovery operation. Lisa Cooper's network of community women had transformed it into a hub of activity, coordinating everything from fundraising events to media coverage to legal strategy. The Environmental Protection Office is very interested in those chemical samples, Martha Jenkins reported during their morning meeting. Turns out the herbicide used is restricted. Every purchase has to be logged and tracked. And guess who didn't report buying any recently? Lisa added with grim satisfaction. Carter Farms hasn't logged a purchase in months, despite their usual usage patterns. Sarah watched the pieces coming together. The attack had been meant to destroy them, but instead it had galvanized support and exposed corruption that had gone unchallenged for generations. A commotion outside drew their attention. Blake Carter's truck had pulled up to the volunteer gathering, but it wasn't Blake who stepped out. It was his mother. Sarah met Mrs. Carter at the edge of the field. The teacher's face showed the strain of recent weeks, but there was determination in her stance. "I can't stay silent anymore," Mrs. Carter said without preamble. "What they did, what my husband and son did, it wasn't just wrong, it was criminal." She held out a USB drive with shaking hands. "This has purchase records, emails, planning discussions. They didn't think I knew how to access Jim's computer. They never thought I'd betray them," Sarah suggested gently. "Stand up to them," Mrs. Carter corrected. "I'm a teacher. I'm supposed to show children right from wrong. What kind of example am I setting by protecting this?" The evidence was damning. Not just of the attack on Willow Creek Farm, but of years of environmental violations, corruption, and intimidation. Mrs. Carter's courage in coming forward would cost her her marriage, but Sarah saw the relief in her eyes, the freedom of finally choosing truth over loyalty. The volunteer crew had grown throughout the morning. Sarah recognized faces from town, from church, from school meetings. People who had stayed neutral before were now taking sides, and they weren't choosing the Carters. "Look," Tyler called out. In the freshly cleared soil, tiny green shoots were emerging, resilient plants surviving despite the chemical attack. "Life finds a way." Emma rolled her eyes at her brother's Jurassic Park reference, but she was smiling. "Yeah, and so do we." Sarah watched her children working alongside the volunteers, their initial devastation transformed into purposeful energy. They had learned something powerful, that destruction could lead to reconstruction, that endings could become beginnings. The GoFundMe total kept climbing, the media coverage kept spreading, the evidence against the Carters kept mounting. But more important than any of that was the sight before her. A community coming together to rebuild not just a farm, but their own sense of justice and possibility. "You know what this means," Gerald said, watching the volunteers work. "Come. Spring, you'll have more hands willing to help than you know what to do with. These people aren't just here for the crisis, they're invested now." Sarah nodded. The destruction of their harvest had been devastating, but from those ruins, something even more valuable was growing. A movement, a revolution, a transformation of what farming could mean in Millbrook. They would rebuild Willow Creek Farm. But more than that, they would rebuild the very foundations of their community, creating something stronger and more inclusive than Jim Carter could have ever imagined. The tiny green shoots pushing through the soil were just the beginning. The police report lay open on Detective Sandra Martinez's desk, its pages crowded with notes from the county investigator who had finally taken over the case. The local sheriff's reluctance to pursue the investigation had itself become evidence. Another thread in the web of corruption they were uncovering. "Walk me through the timeline again," Detective Martinez said, her sharp eyes focused on Sarah. They sat in the detective's office in the county seat, away from Millbrook's complicated politics. Sarah pointed to the security footage playing on the detective's computer. The trucks arrived at 2:17 a.m., 6 people moving with clear purpose. They knew exactly where to hit us, which chemicals to use. And your son identified the tractor tracks. Tyler knows his equipment, but more importantly, we have Mrs. Carter's evidence now. Emails discussing the plan, receipts for the restricted herbicides, everything. The detective nodded, adding to her notes. Mrs. Carter's testimony is crucial. Along with the environmental violations we're uncovering, this goes way beyond simple vandalism. A knock at the door interrupted them. A man in a suit entered, carrying a thick file. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. The EPA just sent over their preliminary findings. Detective Martinez reviewed the document, her eyebrows rising. Mr. Carter hasn't just been falsifying his herbicide purchase records. He's been dumping excess chemicals in the watershed. For years, Sarah felt her stomach clench. The creek that runs through their property feeds into the town's water supply, the detective finished. This is now a public health issue. The investigation was growing beyond anything Sarah had anticipated. What had started as an attack on her farm was revealing decades of environmental crimes and corruption. Back at Willow Creek Farm that afternoon, Sarah found Tyler in deep discussion with the university research team. They had set up monitoring stations throughout the fields, studying the soil's recovery process. The chemical breakdown is fascinating, Dr. Rodriguez was saying. Your son's documentation is helping us understand how organic soil systems respond to acute toxic exposure. This could help other farms recover from similar attacks. Tyler beamed with pride. The tragedy had sparked his passion for agricultural science, transforming him from a curious kid into a dedicated young researcher. Emma was in the kitchen with Lisa Cooper, updating their evidence timeline. The kitchen wall had become a complex web of connections, linking people, events, and evidence with colored strings. Blake's starting to crack, Emma reported. He's been asking around about making a deal, claiming his father pressured him into participating. Lisa nodded grimly. The Carter empire's crumbling. 3 more farmers came forward today, describing similar intimidation tactics from years back. They were just too scared to speak up before. Sarah studied the wall of evidence. In the center was a photograph of their destroyed fields, but radiating out from it were dozens of other stories. Environmental violations, financial corruption, systematic intimidation, the attack on Willow Creek Farm had been just the visible part of a much deeper cancer in the community. Sarah! Gerald's truck screeched into the driveway. He hurried inside, waving a document. You need to see this. Remember those soil samples Eleanor took? They found traces of chemicals that have been banned for decades. The Carters haven't just been using restricted herbicides. They've been using illegal ones. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. But with each new revelation, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility growing. This wasn't just about justice for her farm anymore. It was about exposing decades of corruption that had poisoned both the land and the community. Detective Martinez called that evening with an update. We're bringing in the FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit. This case has grown beyond our jurisdiction. The patterns we're seeing suggest a multi-state operation, illegal chemical trading, environmental violations, possibly even money laundering. Sarah sat on her porch after the call, watching the sun set over her recovering fields. The ground was healing slowly but surely. The community was healing too, as people found the courage to stand up, to speak out, to reclaim their voice. A car pulled into the drive, Mrs. Carter, bringing more files from her husband's office. She looked both exhausted and relieved, the burden of secrets finally lifting. They're going to arrest Jim tomorrow, she said without preamble. Blake, too. The FBI agent said, "He said I did the right thing." Coming forward, Sarah reached out and squeezed her hand. "You did. It's not easy standing up to people you love, but sometimes love means holding people accountable." The investigation was far from over, but the truth was finally emerging into the light. Like the resilient plants pushing through their poisoned soil, justice was finding a way to grow. The town hall meeting video would later be viewed thousands of times online, but living through it was different. Sarah could feel the tension in the packed room as Mayor Thompson called the emergency session to order. The recent arrests of Jim and Blake Carter had split the community, and tonight everyone would have their say. "Before we begin," the mayor announced, "I want to remind everyone that this is a civil discussion. The FBI investigation is ongoing, and we're not here to try anyone in the court of public opinion." A harsh laugh came from the back. Too late for that. Someone had already papered the town with Carter family toxic legacy posters featuring satellite photos of the contaminated watershed. The meeting's agenda was simple: addressing the environmental crisis and its impact on the community. But everyone knew the real issue was deeper. It was about power, change, and the future of farming in Millbrook. The preliminary water testing results are concerning, the EPA representative began, displaying charts on the screen. "We've found significant levels of restricted chemicals, some banned since the 1980s. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah watched faces shift from skepticism to concern as the data was presented. This wasn't about her farm anymore. This was about their children drinking contaminated water. "My daughter has had unexplained health issues for years," a woman stood up. "We live downstream from Carter Farms. Are you saying—" The EPA representative's careful response was drowned out by growing voices of anger. Decades of suspicion were crystallizing into terrible certainty. "The Carters knew," someone shouted. "They knew, and they kept dumping." "What about the other farms?" another voice demanded. "Who else has been using these chemicals?" The mayor tried to maintain order, but the dam had broken. Farmers stood up to defend their practices. Neighbors accused neighbors. Old grievances surfaced. Sarah watched it all, understanding that this wasn't chaos. It was catharsis. "My husband warned them," Mrs. Carter's voice cut through the noise. She stood, trembling but determined. "Years ago, when he was their environmental consultant, he told them the chemicals were dangerous, that they were contaminating the groundwater. They fired him and blacklisted him from working in the county." The room fell silent. Mrs. Carter had become an unlikely hero in recent weeks. Her courage in exposing her husband's crimes earning her both admiration and criticism. "We all knew something was wrong," Gerald spoke up from his seat. "We just didn't want to see it. Easier to blame the newcomer with her organic methods than face what we'd let happen to our land." Sarah felt eyes turn to her. Taking a deep breath, she stood. "I came to Millbrook because it was my last chance," she began. "What I found was a community at a crossroads. You can keep holding on to methods that poison your land and divide your people, or you can embrace change." "Easy for you to say," one of Carter's allies shouted. "You're not feeding half the state with your boutique organic farm." "No," Sarah agreed, "but I am proving there's another way. My soil is healing after the attack. My crops are growing back, stronger, and I'm not doing it alone." She gestured to the university researchers who had set up a display of their findings. "Science is showing us better methods. Methods that don't require us to poison our children's future to feed them today." Eleanor Watson stood up slowly. "I've been converting my orchards to organic methods, following Sarah's example. My yields are down slightly, but my costs are lower, and my soil is healthier than it's been in decades." More voices joined in. Farmers who had been quietly experimenting with sustainable methods, parents worried about water quality, young people eager for change. The meeting became a forum for reimagining Millbrook's agricultural future. "This isn't about destroying the old ways," Sarah continued. "It's about finding a better path forward, one that doesn't require us to choose between prosperity and health. The mayor finally called for concrete action. Committees were formed for water quality monitoring, for supporting farmers transitioning to organic methods, for community health screening. The anger began to transform into purpose. As the meeting wound down, Sarah found herself surrounded by farmers asking about her methods, her recovery process, her vision for the future. The very things that had made her an outsider were now making her a leader. "Mom," Emma whispered, tugging her sleeve. "Look." Through the window, they could see protesters gathering outside the Carter house, holding signs about water quality and corporate accountability. But there were also people on the lawn of Willow Creek Farm, planting trees along the property line. A living barrier against chemical drift, a symbol of renewal. The community wasn't just divided, it was transforming. And in that transformation, Sarah saw hope, not just for her farm, but for all of Millbrook. The arrest warrants arrived at dawn. Sarah watched from her porch as FBI agents and state police descended on the Carter property, their lights flashing silently in the grey morning light. It felt surreal, like watching the end of one era and the beginning of another. Multiple counts of environmental violations, Detective Martinez explained as she stopped by later that morning. Criminal conspiracy, witness intimidation, fraud. The evidence Mrs. Carter provided broke the case wide open, but your documentation and Tyler's observations about the tractor tracks gave us the timeline we needed. Emma was updating their social media followers, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The story had gone national, becoming a symbol of the fight between traditional and sustainable farming practices. "Blake made a deal," the detective continued. "He's testifying against his father, providing details about years of illegal chemical use and intimidation tactics. Other farmers are coming forward too, describing how the Carters pressured them to stay quiet about the contamination." Tyler looked up from his latest soil samples. "Will they have to clean up the water? Environmental remediation will be part of any settlement," Detective Martinez confirmed. "The EPA's already drawing up plans. Your research with the university team will actually help guide the cleanup process." The arrests were just the beginning. Throughout the day, more officials arrived, environmental investigators, agricultural inspectors, even representatives from national organic farming organizations. Willow Creek Farm had become ground zero for a larger conversation about the future of American agriculture. "You've started something remarkable," Gerald said, watching the activity from Sarah's kitchen. "This isn't just about taking down the Carters anymore. It's about changing the whole system." He was right. Already, other farmers were approaching Sarah about transitioning to organic methods. The university had proposed making Willow Creek Farm a research station for sustainable agriculture. Even the local school board was discussing adding agricultural science to the curriculum, with Tyler's experiments as a model. "Mrs. Mitchell," a hesitant voice drew their attention. Blake Carter stood in the doorway, flanked by his lawyer and a federal agent. He looked younger somehow, the arrogance stripped away. "I came to apologize," he said quietly. "Not just for the attack, but for everything. I was raised to believe that power meant never having to say you're sorry, that tradition meant never having to change. I was wrong." Sarah studied him. This young man who had helped destroy her crops, who had threatened her children, who had finally chosen truth over family loyalty. "Apologies matter," she said finally, "but actions matter more. What are you going to do to make this right?" "I'm working with the EPA," Blake replied, "showing them every dump site, every contaminated field, and—" He hesitated, glancing at Tyler. "I'd like to learn about organic farming. Maybe help with the cleanup, the transition, if you're willing to teach me." Tyler's face lit up, but he looked to Sarah for permission. She nodded slowly. Everyone deserves a chance to change, to grow. The news coverage that evening focused on the arrests, but Sarah was more interested in the smaller stories unfolding around her. Mrs. Carter, free from her husband's shadow, had started a support group for families affected by the contamination. Local doctors were compiling health data, mapping cancer clusters and unexplained illnesses around chemical dump sites. And in Sarah's fields, life continued its stubborn return. The organic remediation methods were working, helped by an army of volunteer hands and guided by scientific expertise. Where destruction had reigned, new growth emerged. "Look what I've found," Emma called from the edge of the property. In the growing dusk, she held up a mason jar. Inside, fireflies danced, the first seen in the area in years. "Bioindicators," Tyler explained proudly. "Their presence means the ecosystem is healing." Sarah watched her children release the fireflies, their light dancing across the recovering fields. The moment felt symbolic. Light returning after darkness, life persisting. Despite poison, truth emerging after years of silence. Detective Martinez's car pulled up one last time that evening. "Thought you'd want to know. Jim Carter's lawyers are trying to make a deal. They know how much evidence we have." "Let them," Sarah replied. "Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration." She looked out over her land, where the last of the day's volunteers were heading home. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities for healing, both the soil and the community. The fireflies rose higher, their light merging with the first stars of evening. In their dance, Sarah saw the future of Willow Creek Farm, of Millbrook, of farming itself, a future built on respect for the land, on science and tradition working together, on the courage to change and the wisdom to grow. The community garden plans spread across Sarah's kitchen table, covered in annotations and signatures. What had started as a recovery project for Willow Creek Farm had evolved into something bigger, a blueprint for transforming Millbrook's approach to agriculture. "We've got 30 families signed up already," Lisa Cooper announced, adding another name to the list. "Everyone wants to learn organic farming methods, and they're willing to put in the work to make it happen." The concept was simple, but powerful. Convert 10 acres of Sarah's recovered land into a community teaching garden. Families would get their own plots to practice sustainable farming techniques, with guidance from Sarah, Gerald, and the university extension team. "Blake's been surprisingly helpful," Emma admitted, reviewing the technical drawings. "He actually knows a lot about irrigation systems, and he's determined to use that knowledge for good now." Sarah watched through the window as Blake worked, with Tyler and the university team installing soil moisture sensors across the teaching plots. The young man's transformation had been remarkable, from antagonist to ally, from destroyer to builder. "The organic grocery wants to set up a permanent booth at the teaching garden," Lisa continued. "They'll buy produce directly from the community gardeners. It's like a farmer's market and a training program combined." The idea was catching on. Beyond Millbrook, other communities had sent representatives to study their model, looking to replicate the combination of education, community involvement, and sustainable practices. "Mrs. Mitchell?" A new voice joined them, Andrea Carter, Blake's younger sister. "Is it too late to sign up for a plot? Mom and we want to learn, to do things differently." Sarah smiled, making room at the table. "It's never too late to start growing something new." Outside, the transformation was visible everywhere. The poisoned fields were healing, helped by carefully selected remediation crops and organic treatments. The greenhouse had been rebuilt and expanded, now serving as both a production facility and a classroom. But the most significant changes were in the people. Farmers who had once scorned Sarah's methods now came seeking advice. Children from the school visited regularly, learning about ecology and sustainable agriculture through hands-on experience. Even some of the Carter family's staunchest allies had begun to shift their perspectives. "Look at this," Tyler called from the doorway, holding up a soil sample. "The earthworm population is back to normal levels. The biological indicators are all trending positive." The scientific monitoring had become a community project itself. Local high school students worked alongside university researchers, documenting the land's recovery, and learning about environmental science in the process. A convoy of trucks arrived, carrying lumber and supplies for the teaching garden's infrastructure. Mark Peterson led the volunteer construction crew, a mix of farmers, townspeople, and even some of Blake's former friends, all working together to build something positive. "We're putting in wheelchair-accessible beds here," Mark explained, pointing to his plans. "The retirement home wants their residents to be able to participate. And over there, we're building child-height plots for the elementary school program." Sarah remembered her first days at Willow Creek Farm, feeling isolated and overwhelmed. Now, watching the community come together, she understood that the attack on her farm had broken down more than just plants. It had shattered the barriers between people, allowing new connections to grow. The FBI finished their final interviews, Gerald reported, joining them for the afternoon planning session. "Jim Carter's going away for a long time, but more importantly, they're using our case to investigate similar situations in other farming communities." Emma looked up from her laptop. "The online response has been incredible. Our tutorial videos about organic transition methods have gone viral in farming communities across the country. People keep asking when we're going to start formal training. Programs." The idea had merit. Sarah had already been discussing possibilities with the university: weekend workshops, certification programs, hands-on training for farmers wanting to transition to sustainable methods. "One step at a time," she reminded them, but her mind was already working on the possibilities. As the sun began to set, the volunteer crews wrapped up their day's work. The teaching garden skeleton was taking shape. Raised beds, irrigation systems, composting stations, and a central pavilion for classes and community events. Sarah stood with her children, watching the last trucks leave. Where there had once been destroyed crops and poisoned soil, now there was promise. Where there had been division and fear, now there was cooperation and hope. "You know what this really is," Emma said softly. "It's not just a garden. It's a healing place for the land and the people." Tyler nodded, his hands dirty from working with the soil sensors. "Science and community, working together, just like you always said." "Mom," Sarah hugged them both, their shadows long in the evening light. The fireflies were emerging again, their lights dancing above the newly turned earth like stars come down to bless their work. Tomorrow would bring more volunteers, more learning, more growth. But tonight, standing in the midst of their rebuilding, Sarah felt the truth of what they'd accomplished. They hadn't just saved a farm, they'd planted the seeds of a movement. The first prize ribbon from the county fair hung proudly in the farmhouse kitchen, its blue silk catching the morning light. Best organic produce, Willow Creek Farm Community Garden. But it wasn't just the ribbon that made Sarah smile. It was the photo beside it, showing her entire team of community gardeners accepting the award together. The judges couldn't believe these vegetables came from the same fields that were destroyed, Emma said, setting down a basket of fresh tomatoes. Tyler's experimental varieties especially impressed them. The harvest was exceeding all expectations. Where chemical destruction had once reigned, now life flourished in even greater abundance. The remediation crops had enriched the soil beyond their hopes, and the new organic methods were proving more effective than even Sarah had anticipated. "The university's preliminary report is ready," Tyler announced, hurrying in with his tablet. "They're calling it the Willow Creek Recovery Model. They want to publish it in a major agricultural journal." Sarah looked over the data her son had helped compile. The numbers told an impressive story. Soil organic matter increased by 40%, beneficial insect populations restored, crop yields matching or exceeding pre-attack levels, all without chemical interventions. Outside, the morning harvest was in full swing. Community garden members worked alongside professional farmers, all following the sustainable methods they'd learned over the past months. Blake Carter was among them, teaching new volunteers the proper way to test soil moisture using natural indicators rather than relying solely on technology. The organic grocery wants to double their order, Lisa Cooper reported, checking her clipboard. And 3 more restaurants have asked about regular deliveries. We might need to expand the greenhouse operations. The success was spreading beyond their own fields. Other farms in the county had begun transitioning to organic methods, using Willow Creek's model. The community garden had become a training center, hosting farmers from across the state who wanted to learn sustainable practices. Mrs. Mitchell, Andrea Carter approached, carrying a stunning arrangement of heirloom vegetables. The photography team is here for the magazine shoot. They want to capture the whole community working together. The National Farming Magazine's interest was another sign of their impact. They wanted to tell the story not just of recovery from destruction, but of how a crisis had transformed an entire community's approach to agriculture. Sarah watched as people gathered for the photo. Former adversaries worked side by side, sharing knowledge and jokes. Children from the school program proudly showed off their garden plots to the photographers. Even Mrs. Carter was there, teaching other women about natural pest control methods she'd learned from Sarah. "You've created something extraordinary." "Here," Eleanor Watson said, joining Sarah at the edge of the fields, "something that goes far beyond farming." She was right. The harvest wasn't just about crops. It was about growth of all kinds. Tyler had discovered his calling in agricultural science, his research now contributing to peer-reviewed journals. Emma had become a skilled spokesperson for sustainable farming, her social media advocacy reaching thousands. The morning's harvest filled their new barn. Heirloom tomatoes in rainbow colors, heritage grain varieties, experimental crop strains developed in collaboration with the university. Each crate represented not just food, but knowledge gained, relationships built, priorities shifted. "Time for the weekly market meeting," Emma reminded her. In the converted farmhouse living room, farmers and community gardeners gathered to coordinate their selling strategy. The Willow Creek brand had come to represent quality and innovation in organic farming. The environmental remediation team sent their latest results, Blake reported during the meeting. "The watershed is showing significant improvement. The cleanup methods we developed here are being implemented at other contaminated sites." Sarah remembered standing in these same fields months ago, looking at destruction and feeling despair. Now she saw abundance, community, and hope. The attack that was meant to destroy them had instead sparked a revolution in how their community approached farming. "Mom," Tyler called from the doorway, "you need to see this." He led her to his experimental plot, where a new variety of drought-resistant wheat was thriving. Beside it, carefully labeled stakes marked the progress of other innovations: natural, pest-deterrent companions, soil-enriching cover crops, heritage grains adapted for organic growing. "We're not just growing food," he said proudly. "We're growing solutions." The morning sun rose higher, illuminating fields that stretched green and vital in every direction. September's harvest was proving what they had known in their hearts: that destruction could lead to renewal, that opposition could transform into cooperation, that the darkest moments could birth the brightest innovations. Sarah touched the prize ribbon gently. It represented more than just agricultural success. It symbolized the triumph of resilience, community, and unwavering hope. Their harvest was feeding bodies, but their story was feeding souls, showing what was possible when people chose to grow together rather than tear each other apart. The updated "Welcome to Willow Creek" sign stood proudly at the farm's entrance, now bearing the addition, "Home of Mitchell Family Farms, Community-Supported Agriculture and Education Center." 1 year had passed since the attack that had nearly destroyed everything, and the transformation was remarkable. Sarah sat on the farmhouse porch, sipping morning coffee and watching the first students arrive for the day's training session. The educational program had grown beyond their initial dreams. Farmers from across the country now came to learn organic transition methods, sustainable practices, and community-building strategies. "Mom!" Tyler burst out of the house, tablet in hand. "The journal just published my research paper. Well, our research paper, Dr. Rodriguez and I are co-authors." At 13, Tyler had become the youngest published researcher in the field of organic soil remediation. His experience documenting their farm's recovery had sparked what was clearly becoming a lifelong passion for agricultural science. Emma appeared behind him, already dressed for her morning video segment. Her social media channels had evolved into a serious educational platform, reaching hundreds of thousands of followers interested in sustainable farming. "The Secretary of Agriculture confirmed for next month's conference," she announced. "They want to use our community garden model as a template for a national program." Sarah smiled at her children's excitement. They'd grown so much, and not just in height. The crisis had challenged them, but it had also revealed their strengths and shaped their futures. The morning crowd began gathering for the day's workshops. Blake Carter, now a certified organic farming instructor, was setting up the soil testing demonstration. His sister Andrea led the herb garden program, while their mother coordinated the community outreach efforts. "Quite a change from last year," Gerald observed, joining Sarah on the porch. Though officially retired, he remained a beloved mentor to everyone at Willow Creek. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself," Sarah admitted. The changes went far beyond their farm. The EPA had used their case to strengthen agricultural chemical regulations nationwide. The university's agricultural department had established a permanent research station on their land. The watershed cleanup had become a model for environmental remediation projects across the country. Jim Carter watched it all from prison, his empire dismantled, but his legacy transformed through his family's dedication to making amends. His wife had turned their former farmland into a nature preserve, working with environmental groups to restore native habitats. "Sarah," Lisa Cooper called from the garden, "the school board is here about expanding the agricultural science program." The educational impact had perhaps been their greatest success. Schools across the region now incorporated sustainable agriculture into their curriculum, using Willow Creek's community garden as a living classroom. Tyler's Young Scientists Club had chapters in 3 counties. Sarah walked through the teaching gardens, now a vibrant patchwork of experimental plots, traditional beds, and community spaces. Elderly residents tended their accessible gardens, alongside young families learning to grow food for the first time. The food bank plots provided fresh produce for those in need, while restaurant chefs worked with farmers to grow specialty crops. "Remember when this was all destroyed?" Emma asked softly, falling into step beside her mother. "It felt like the end of everything. Instead, it was just the beginning," Sarah replied. They reached the center of the garden, where the memorial pond reflected the morning sky. They'd created it where the worst chemical damage had occurred, transforming a scar into a source of beauty and life. Water lilies floated on the surface, while beneficial insects buzzed among native plants. The morning's activities began. Classes gathering, researchers checking their plots, community members arriving to tend their gardens. The farm hummed with purposeful energy, each person contributing to their shared vision of sustainable agriculture. Sarah thought about the frightened woman who had arrived here with nothing but hope and determination. That woman could never have imagined this, not just the farm's success, but the way it had helped heal and transform an entire community. "Mom," Tyler called, "the new group wants to hear the story. Will you tell it?" Sarah looked at the eager faces gathered around the memorial pond. Every week, new visitors asked to hear how Willow Creek Farm had risen from destruction to become a beacon of hope and change. "The story isn't just about our farm," she began. "It's about what happens when people choose to grow together instead of apart, when they choose to feed hope instead of fear, to cultivate unity instead of division." As she spoke, butterflies danced among the flowers that grew where chemicals had once poisoned the soil. Birds sang in trees planted by community. Hands, and in the rich earth beneath their feet, millions of living things worked together to create abundance. The sign at the farm's entrance caught the morning sun, its new message shining bright. "Welcome to Willow Creek, where community grows." It wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise, renewed every day, to keep building something bigger than themselves. Sarah looked at her children, her community, her flourishing fields, and knew that their story would keep growing, season after season, inspiring others to plant their own seeds of change. Some crops fed the body, others fed the soul. At Willow Creek Farm, they had learned to grow both.